They cut my access badge before the corporate elevator even hit the lobby, trading 30 years of industrial intuition for a freshly minted, AI-driven efficiency model. But as I walked out into the crisp evening air, I knew the stubborn liquid fire heart of that factory better than the algorithm ever would. And the cold silence was already ticking down. The air in the executive suite always smelled like expensive sandalwood and unearned confidence. It was a sterile, climate controlled oxygen mix designed to make people forget that 50 feet below them, real men and women were wrestling with 500 tons of molten white hot steel. CEO Victoria Vance didn't do grease. She didn't do suit. She did sleek, minimalist presentation decks with gradient arrows pointing aggressively upward. When she looked at me, she didn't see the guy who had kept the heart of blast furnace number 4 beating through 3 recessions and 2 structural overhauls. She saw a line-item budget expense that stubbornly refused to fit into her cloud-based future. "The legacy mindset is a drag on our quarterly agility, Frank," she said, her voice dropping into that smooth practice cadence they teach you in high-end business schools. She didn't look up from her sleek glass tablet as she signed the digital directive. "We are transitioning to automated safety compliance. The algorithm predicts stress fractures and thermal anomalies with 98% accuracy. The safety review board is being restructured into a digital dashboard." She closed her leather-bound folder with a crisp final snap. It was exactly 5 p.m. Not a minute before, not a minute after. She stood up, adjusted her pristine designer blazer, and offered me a smile so sharp it could have cut glass. "Thank you for your service, Frank. Your badge will deactivate at the turnstiles." I looked at the folder, then at her. I thought about mentioning the slight rhythmic shudder in the primary cooling intake, the one you can't hear with your ears, but you can feel right through the soles of your work boots when the pressure crosses the critical threshold. I thought about explaining that a dashboard doesn't know what old brick smells like when it's about to collapse into a river of liquid fire, but the corporate gloss in her eyes was impenetrable. There is no arguing with someone who believes the world is entirely made of data points. "Good luck, Victoria," I said quietly, leaving my worn leather logbook on the glass table. "You're going to need it around 4 a.m. when the atmospheric humidity drops." She didn't even look back as she stepped into the private elevator. I took the long way out, walking past the rows of monitors where 20-something tech analysts sat in ergonomic chairs, watching green graphs bounce up and down. They looked like kids playing a simulation game, completely oblivious to the fact that the simulation could turn into a catastrophic volcanic event if someone miscalculated a single decimal point. When I reached the main exit, my badge gave a pathetic, high-pitched beep and flashed red. The security guard, an old-timer named Marcus who had known me since my hair was black, wouldn't look me in the eye. He just unlocked the side gate manually, giving me a tight, sympathetic nod. I stepped out into the parking lot. The evening air was turning crisp, biting at my face, carrying that distinct scent of ozone and heavy industry. Behind me, the factory hummed, a massive iron beast that I had spent half my life keeping alive. It sounded normal to the untrained ear, but as I reached my truck, I stopped and listened closer. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible drag in the rhythm of the exhaust fans. The algorithm probably flagged it as a minor optimization variance. I knew better. It was the first sign of a chokehold. I climbed into my cabin, turned the key, and looked back at the towering smokestack silhouetted against the darkening sky. A strange, cold calm washed over me. I had warned them. I had written 3 separate memos about the thermal expansion limits of the new silicon carbide linings under automated cycling. They wanted a modern, human-free operation. They wanted a system that didn't complain about double-time pay or structural fatigue. Well, they had it now. But as the first stars began to pierce the smog, a chilling thought crossed my mind. The machine didn't know how to negotiate with the laws of thermodynamics, and the countdown had already begun. By 2:14 a.m., the temperature outside had dropped by 15 degrees, driving a wedge of freezing, high-pressure air straight into the valley where the plant sat. In my living room, 3 miles away, I sat in the dark, watching the frost spiderweb across the window pane. I didn't need a digital dashboard to tell me what was happening. I could feel it in my bones. When the air turns that crisp, the humidity plummeting like a stone, the intake valves on blast furnace number 4 always get temperamental. They breathe differently. It's a mechanical respiratory system, and right now, it was drawing in dense icy oxygen that would send the internal thermal regulators into a frantic digital tailspin. My phone sat perfectly still on the kitchen counter, its silent screen reflecting the cold blue light of the microwave clock. Part of me, the part that still had grease embedded under his fingernails, wanted to reach out to call the night shift control room and tell young Miller to manually override the automated dampers before the pressure differential tripped the safety seals. But then I remembered Victoria's sharp glass-cutting smile. We are transitioning to automated safety compliance. The algorithm was in the driver's seat now. Let it steer. At 3:45 a.m., the automated system did exactly what I knew it would do. Lacking the human touch to nurse the valves through the thermal shock, the AI panicked. It saw a massive localized spike in core pressure, a ghost reading caused by the rapidly shrinking air intakes, and invoked its primary directive: absolute hazard mitigation. The emergency purge valves blew open with a distant thunderous roar that rattled my kitchen windows even from miles away. It was a magnificent, terrifying sound. The automated safety protocol, in its infinite mathematical wisdom, had dumped 500 tons of superheated gas into the atmosphere to save itself from an imaginary rupture. But in doing so, it ran headfirst into the ultimate trap of heavy metallurgy. It let the core temperature drop below the critical threshold. The liquid steel inside the main hearth began to lose its fluidity, transforming from a vibrant, roaring river of white-hot energy into a sluggish, primordial sludge. By the time the sun began to peek through the industrial haze at 6 a.m., the factory was wrapped in a horrifying, unnatural quiet. For 30 years, that plant had been a living entity, breathing a continuous, low-frequency baseline that vibrated through the entire town. Now there was nothing. No thrum of the giant induction coils, no hiss of the steam lines, no rumble of the heavy cranes. Just the hollow metallic clicking of cooling iron. At 6:41 a.m. sharp, the CFO, Arthur Pendleton, sat in his glass-walled office, staring at a real-time production report that looked like a flatlined EKG. The heavy, bold font on his monitor read, "Total output, zero point zero tons." The grand, automated crown jewel of the corporate restructuring had successfully optimized itself into complete and total paralysis. Arthur, a man who generally measured his life in basis points and corporate overhead, looked like he had just swallowed a handful of hot rivets. He stared through the window at the dead smokestacks, his hands shaking slightly as he tapped his fingers on his mahogany desk. The pristine, modern methods had achieved the impossible. They had tamed the iron beast, but in the process, they had choked it to death. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the speed dial for the executive suite, knowing that the silence spreading through the valley below wasn't just a temporary delay. It was the sound of a multi-million-dollar disaster hardening into solid stone, and nobody in that building had the slightest clue how to break the spell. If you want to find out how Arthur, Victoria, and their entire team of data analysts try to handle a freezing, solidifying multi-million-dollar mountain of iron without the one man who knows how to talk to the beast, make sure to save this story or hit follow. The corporate board is about to learn that you can't fire the laws of physics, and the real heat is just beginning. The emergency boardroom smelled of burnt coffee and cold panic. It was only 7:15 a.m., but the pristine glass walls were already smeared with frantic finger marks where analysts had been pointing at cascading red error codes. CEO Victoria Vance sat at the head of the table, her leather folder open, though she wasn't looking at it. Her eyes were locked on the giant central monitor, displaying a 3D digital twin of blast furnace number 4. In the simulation, the vibrant, glowing orange core had turned an ominous, bruised shade of purple. "Explain to me," Victoria said, her voice dangerously quiet, losing that smooth seminar-trained gloss. How a system designed for maximum operational agility manages to shut down our entire primary production line in less than 14 hours. Next to her, Arthur Pendleton, the CFO, looked like a ghost in a bespoke suit. He held a tablet with financial projections that were updating in real time, the numbers scrolling downward so fast they blurred. Every minute the hearth remains cold, we are burning through $200,000 in contractual penalties, Victoria. The automotive clients in Detroit are already calling. If that steel hardens completely, the furnace is a write-off. We're talking about a 9-figure capital loss. A young lead software engineer, wearing a lanyard that looked far too bright for the atmosphere in the room, stepped forward nervously. The the algorithm performed exactly as programmed, Ms. Vance. It detected a thermal shock anomaly in the intake valves at 3:45 a.m. and initiated a standard emergency bleed-off to prevent a structural breach. It was a textbook hazard mitigation routine. Then why? Arthur snapped, his fist coming down on the mahogany table with a hollow thud. Can't anyone restart the damn thing? Silence stretched across the room, heavy and suffocating. The analysts looked at their shoes. The engineer swallowed hard, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Because, the engineer whispered, the core temperature dropped below the critical fluidity index. The automated restart sequence requires the sensors to read a uniform internal pressure. But right now, the slag layer at the top has crusted over. The AI won't ignite the gas injectors because it thinks the blocked pressure will cause an explosion. It's caught in a logical safety loop. So override it, Victoria ordered, her eyes narrowing. Manually push the ignition command through the dashboard. We tried, the youth stammered, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. The system rejected the override. It says the physical conditions inside the hearth are non-compliant with safe operating parameters. To force it, we need a manual mechanical calibration at the primary intake damper. Someone has to physically adjust the pressure counterweights on the floor. Victoria frowned, her sharp features tightening. Then send the floor supervisor down there to turn the valve. What's the issue? The room went completely quiet again. The silence was absolute, save for the hum of the server racks behind the wall. Arthur looked at Victoria, his expression a mixture of profound exhaustion and sudden, terrifying realization. He leaned back in his chair, his tablet slipping from his fingers onto the table. The floor supervisor doesn't know how, Victoria, Arthur said softly, his voice dripping with bitter irony. We transitioned him to a regional logistics role in Gdansk last month to optimize corporate synergy. The only people down there right now are 24-year-old technicians who monitor your digital dashboards. They don't know what a counterweight looks like. They've never even held a physical wrench. Victoria's gaze dropped to the center of the table, landing precisely on the spot where my worn leather logbook had been sitting the night before. It was gone now, probably thrown into a recycling bin by the cleaning staff during the 6 a.m. shift change. The modern, human-free, optimized future had arrived, and it was currently freezing to death in the middle of a Pennsylvania winter, completely indifferent to the corporate hierarchy. By 9:30 a.m., the corporate facade had completely cracked. The sleek, minimalist sanctuary of the executive suite now felt like a command bunker under siege. Victoria Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her phone pressed so hard against her ear that her knuckles were white. On the other end, the chairman of the board was screaming loud enough that Arthur could hear the tinny, distorted rage from 3 feet away. I don't care about the cloud integration, Victoria, the chairman roared. The market opens in 30 minutes, and someone just leaked to the press that our primary hearth is cold. Fix it, or the board will find someone who can before the closing bell. The line went dead. Victoria lowered the phone, her breathing shallow. For the first time since she had taken the helm, her immaculate hair was slightly out of place, a single stray strand falling across her forehead. She looked at Arthur, her eyes wide with a desperate, calculating panic. Call him, she whispered. Arthur didn't need to ask who. He already had his personal phone out. his thumb hovering over my number. He pressed dial and put it on speaker. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Every chime felt like a physical blow in the silent room. On the fourth ring, the line clicked open. The heavy, rhythmic rumble of a diesel engine filled the executive office. I was sitting in my old truck, probably watching the crows circle the dead smokestacks from the diner across the highway. "Frank," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, adopting the faux camaraderie of a man who desperately needed a favor. "Frank, old friend, we have a bit of a situation down here on the floor. The automated system, well, it encountered a minor calibration error during the temperature drop last night. We need your eyes on blast furnace number 4. I let the diesel engine do the talking for a long, agonizing 5 seconds. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I could hear the faint clink of the ceramic mug against my dashboard through the line. "A calibration error, Arthur?" I said, my voice smooth, casual, completely devoid of the panic echoing through their glass tower. "That's funny. My digital dashboard here says it's a beautiful morning for a drive. I'm currently looking at a completely clear sky over the valley. No smoke at all. Must be very efficient." Victoria stepped closer to the phone, her professional pride warring with sheer survival instinct. "Frank, this is Victoria. Let's skip the posturing. The hearth is solidifying. The software won't let us force an ignition because the counterweights are jammed. We are prepared to offer you a consulting fee. $20,000 just to walk the floor supervisor through the manual reset." I chuckled. It wasn't a bitter sound. It was the rich, amused laugh of a man who knew exactly what his weight in gold was. "Victoria, you can't buy an intuition with a consulting fee," I said, my tone turning as cold as the iron in the hearth. "You told me 30 years of experience was a legacy drag on your quarterly agility. You wanted a human-free operation. Well, you have one. The algorithm knows exactly how many tons are in that furnace, down to the decimal point. Let it figure out how to melt them." "Frank, please," Arthur pleaded, abandoning all corporate dignity. "The entire plant will be ruined by noon. If the lining cracks, the whole facility is scrap metal. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs." "They already lost their jobs, Arthur. You laid off the entire maintenance crew 2 weeks ago to bump the stock price," I replied calmly. "But I'll tell you what, I'm a reasonable man." I'm sitting at the diner across the street. I have a fresh stack of pancakes in front of me, and I like to eat in peace. When I'm done, if the corporate elevator still works, you can bring me a new contract. Directorship of the Safety Review Board, veto power over all automated implementations, and a salary that reflects just how much you enjoy not being bankrupt. "That's extortion," Victoria hissed, her face flushing red. "No, Victoria," I said softly just before I hung up the phone. "That's the free market optimizing itself. I'll see you at 10:15, if there's still a factory left." The line went dead, leaving the two executives staring at the quiet smartphone on the table, while downstairs, the metallic ticking of the cooling furnace grew louder, marking the final minutes of their digital empire. The glass doors of the executive suite slid open at exactly 10:15 a.m. I walked in wearing my oil-stained canvas jacket and muddy work boots, tracking a bit of the real world onto their pristine, high-pile white carpets. Victoria and Arthur were waiting for me right by the reception desk. Victoria looked like she hadn't breathed a full breath in 5 hours. Her signature leather folder was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she held a single sheet of paper, a freshly drafted contract, signed in ink that was still slightly damp. She didn't say a word. She just handed it to me. I glanced down at the terms. Directorship, full operational veto, a compensation package that would make a Silicon Valley consultant weep. I pulled a cheap plastic pen from my breast pocket, scribbled my signature across the bottom, and handed her back the copy. "All right," I said, zipping up my jacket. "Let's go save your quarterly projection." The elevator ride down to the sublevels was silent, but as the doors opened into the heart of the plant, the atmosphere changed instantly. The cold was a physical weight now, thick and dead, smelling of stagnant soot and unburned gas. A dozen young tech analysts and junior supervisors were clustered around the base of blast furnace number 4, staring at a flashing yellow strobe light like primitive tribesmen, looking at an angry god. "Get back!" I barked, my voice echoing off the massive iron columns. They scrambled out of the way, eager to cede responsibility to anyone who looked like they belonged there. I walked up to the primary intake housing. The automated actuator arm was locked tight, frozen in its panic state, its digital screen displaying a sterile, polite message. Error 404, actuator position unresolvable. I didn't look at the screen. I walked past it, stepping into the narrow grease-slick gap between the main furnace shell and the heavy counterweight rigging. "Frank!" Arthur called out nervously from the safe zone, shielding his expensive suit from the dripping condensation. "The dashboard says the internal pressure is unstable. If you force it, the safety loop says it could explode." "The dashboard is reading a ghost, Arthur," I shouted back, grabbing the heavy 5-foot iron pry bar that I had hidden behind the emergency toolkit 3 years ago, the one the optimization audit told me to throw away. The mechanism was jammed all right. The freezing air had contracted the housing, trapping the manual release pin. The algorithm could recalculate the mathematics of that jam 1,000,000 times, but it didn't have a shoulder to lean on. I wedged the pry bar deep into the throat of the counterweight assembly. I planted my boots against the iron plate, spat into the soot, and threw my entire weight against the steel bar. For a second, nothing happened. My muscles screamed, and the smell of rusted iron filled my nose. "Come on, you stubborn bitch," I muttered under my breath, talking directly to the metal. "Wake up!" With a deafening metallic crack that sounded like a gunshot echoing through the cavernous bay, the counterweight broke free. The heavy iron weights plunged down, the manual dampers slammed open, and a violent rush of trapped, freezing air roared through the intake lines. Instantly, the digital sensors caught up with reality. The pressure equalized. On the high platform above us, the automatic gas injectors registered the change, their spark igniters catching with a deep, hollow thoom that vibrated straight through the soles of my boots. A second later, the low, familiar primordial baseline of blast furnace number 4 began to rumble. The white-hot heart of the plant was breathing again, the liquid slag breaking through the crust, sending a glorious, blinding golden glow washing over the concrete floor. The young technicians broke into spontaneous, frantic cheering. Arthur let out a breath so long it looked like a sigh of religious relief, leaning against a support beam to keep his knees from buckling. I walked out from the rigging, tossed the iron pry bar at the feet of the lead software engineer, and wiped the black grease from my palms onto my jeans. Victoria Vance was standing near the exit, the golden light of the roaring furnace reflecting off her designer blazer. She looked at the liquid fire, then at the pry bar, and finally at me. The sharp, condescending corporate gloss was completely gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet, grounded respect for the laws of physics. "Nice method," she said, her voice barely audible over the magnificent, deafening roar of the machinery. I offered her a small, thin smile as I walked past her toward the break room to finally finish my coffee. "It's a classic, Victoria. Works every time.